All right. Well, we've just crossed over the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of the time of everybody that has joined us today. I want to thank you for joining us on this webinar. We're excited to hopefully share some information that you guys will be able to take and execute on immediately. Today's webinar is really focused on 4 simple approaches to reducing risk and improving the security with your clients. So we're really going to talk a lot about some simple steps you can take to really help your customers bolster their security, and then some long-term strategies that you can take to really make sure that you're on top of it, your clients are on top of it, and ultimately we're taking control and building a strong security program. But the first thing I think we should do, guys, is introduce ourselves and let folks know who we all are. So I'll kick off just with me because I'm already talking. My name's Brian Doyle. I'm the co-founder and CEO of VCIO Toolbox. For those of you that might not be familiar with VCIO Toolbox, we're a unified account management and advisory platform that enables MSP partners to really engage with their clients in a new and meaningful way. The tool allows you to conduct strategic business reviews, conduct GRC activities, governance, risk, and compliance activities, and really help your customer build their VCIO programs as well. And then we have the ability to bring management metrics so you can see the entire pipeline and really track where your customers are deficient and not deficient. So that's a little highlight about me. Joining me today, I've got Frank Raimondi from VP of Channel Alliances and Strategic Partners from Nodeware, and Rick Baird, Managing Director from Pivot Advisory Group. Frank, I'm going to throw it to you first, and why don't you tell a little bit about your background and what you're doing over at Nodeware?
Yeah, you bet. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. So Frank Raimondi, as Brian said, I manage our strategic alliances and partnerships with companies like VCIO Toolbox and others in distribution, and sort of basically enabling people to get our basic software. Nodeware is a continuous vulnerability management tool that is enabling MSP partners like yourself to continuously and sort of proactively look for devices and look for issues, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here today. The broader company where Nodeware came out of is a professional services team that does penetration tests and virtual CISO services and some other things. Primarily, those services are primarily in the U.S., but we've learned a lot. We've been working in the business for 20, 30 years around cybersecurity, so we know how things work. And I think a lot of our focus today is going to be on, kind of as Brian said, the basics, the starting points, and or the base coverage you need to have to really provide some value to your customers. So happy to be here and look forward to the chat.
And Rick, I think it's your turn to introduce yourself to the crowd today.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Frank. I'm Rick Baird. I'm the Managing Director of Pivot Advisory Group. I've been in the industry for over 28 years in the integrator and MSP space. Pivot Advisory Group was created, and as we provide advisory and consulting services to MSPs, we provide the VCIO capability into their portfolio, and that's either in partnership to help with them, with their clients, and establish a roadmap and strategic plan, or they can do, or I partner with an MSP for VCIO services as a white label service.
So, Rick, I think you're going to be kicking off our discussion today, and I'll bring up, the kickoff point. But, I think one of the first things we want to talk about is really, what is out there and what are some of the threats we're facing as a global community, in the IT space.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. This is the data breach stats that you're on screen from the Australian Office, Government Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. It's OAIC, it's a mouthful, but it provides consistent sort of statistics. And this is the latest report. It was from July, December 23. And they do these once every two years, or sorry, twice a year, sorry. It kind of gives a good overview of businesses to see what industries have been impacted, what the threat market looks like, and keeping it in a informative yet simple to understand view for businesses to see what they need to be aware of. So, in here we see the top 5 sectors. Those sectors have been in that space and consistently in the headlines for the last 2 years. So over about 4 or 5 reports. We also see education appearing in that list. What I haven't seen yet is MSP and IT support businesses appearing in that sector or appearing in that report. Are you guys seeing the same sort of sectors, and do you see MSPs being listed as part of the data breaches statistics over in the US?
Yeah, I mean, Brian, you might have a little bit more knowledge, but absolutely. I mean, I think there's a ton of consistency here from the types of breaches, where they're located, and who's involved in them. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple considerations that go with that too. Certainly what you're showing here, especially with health service providers being the number one, attack point. I think we're seeing similar things over here in the States. And the reason we're seeing that is because there's personal information, there's medical data, there's financial information in those systems. Get them once and you're getting a lot of the things you're seeing down market. In terms of the MSP perspective here, we're definitely hearing about more breaches coming down to the MSP level in terms of them being held accountable, potentially financially accountable, potentially punitively accountable. But I think part of the reason you're not going to see them in the top 5 sectors is they are a part of a bigger breach, right? It's the parent company has the breach, the MSP is supporting it. So while the MSP is certainly part of any litigation or any chain of custody down below, at the end of the day, they are not the primary people being responsible. And I don't think the volumes are there yet either. That's the other part. It's just starting to they're starting to be named as opposed to being kind of silently part of the process.
And I guess the other thing is we tend to see them in the sort of tech channels and forums that, we see more of a supply chain attack. We've seen some RMM tools that have had some issues before. There's telephony systems that have been had some problems with, updates that have been filtered through the official channels. So what I found interesting though is that, these sectors, you're right, Brian, they're all sensitive information. Which I think is the primary target for a lot of criminal activity. It just has a lot more value. But when looking at the source of the breaches and the types of breaches or the types of incidents that are causing them, it's been pretty consistent. So 30% up to 42% has been the range for the last 2 years of human error being the main source of the data breach, which is important and sort of timely to the topics we're going to talk to today.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that we're getting around 20 to 30% of those breaches, those human incidents, are mainly phishing, compromised credentials, or compromised stolen credentials and ransomware. So we're seeing that the main sources of this are the human element within any business, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
I'm glad you called that out, Rick, because when you look at that human error at only 30%, I think it's because there's a lot of times where you have compromised and stolen credentials, and you really can't determine, was it human error or was it really coming from some sort of other ancillary attack? But at the end of the day, it's because humans are not protecting those credentials appropriately and probably could fall into that human error area. I think
there's also a timing issue there, right? Some of these interfaces could happen months ago, right? And the actors are finally sort of utilizing, they've gotten deep enough in that they haven't caused any problems until they're ready.
And you might find that part of that 67% of the malicious or criminal attack is where they start doing, monitoring or just surveillance and seeing what happens before they start preying on the human error. And it's all inherent that when technology is built by humans, everything's, there's vulnerabilities, there's exploits, and in the technology we build. So, it makes sense that the human element is going to be a strong point when it comes to any sort of exploits or weaknesses. So yeah, I just thought that was those are, reasonably good statistics that are quite common across the Australian industry. We're seeing a good spread of it. And the source is actually quite reliable and it's really easy to understand. So I encourage people to go back to the AOAIC and check out their reports on every 6 months is when they release them.
I want to bring one other quick point to the attention, because this is one of those things that I think is a misnomer by a lot of the companies that we serve. Notice hacking is only 10% of the overall problems, right? There's this perception that, the only thing we need to do is protect ourselves from the hackers. And as long as we do that, we're covered from a end user public perspective. Again, I'm talking about the traditional business people we serve oftentimes. And you can see that's not a huge amount of where the activity is. So that education that all you as MSPs bring to your customer to really help them understand the human element in it is critical, because the reality is the humans are the biggest challenge that we have.
Yeah.
Yep. We are it.
Yeah, fun with numbers, right?
Yeah.
So, with that being said, maybe it's time to get into what those 4 essential steps are. And I think, Frank, you're going to take us into those, correct?
Yes, yeah, happy to. So, we've looked at these 4 pieces here, and it's all, and you go back to those the different charts there, that they all could be related and prevented by one of these or multiple of these actions. So what we're really looking at here is if you will, proactive cybersecurity, proactive cyber hygiene. Sort of pick it up, pick a name that you want, but it's ultimately about multi-factors is driving an extra behavior to protect an individual or to protect the company, but making sure that you are who you are and you're getting access to things that you have access to, right? As opposed to just breaking it in. So that's a user element that being proactive and driving that. Security awareness clearly is a huge element, and in many cases is, well, all 4 of these are really becoming required elements for compliance issues and for cyber insurance and other things, that if you're not doing all 4 of these, you aren't going to get renewed, you aren't going to be compliant. And we can talk some more about that separately, but security awareness training is really a focused area of enabling or reducing the risk that that human error is going to do. Just basic training of how to spot a phishing attack, how to report things, when to forward emails, when not to, and all of that. So that actually is a great, easy, I think, opportunity for MSPs to offer to in their mix, right? It should be just an easy resell opportunity. There's a couple of providers that are making it even easier for you to customize and build some stuff. So I can help identify that if people have some questions and looking for options there. Continuous monitoring, that's where we specialize and where we focus, right? Which is really, again, proactively making sure, one, what's on your network, right? I think we're amazed at times at how many, devices, let's just call them, or assets are on a network that the user, the business, or even the MSP has no clue, right? So people think, well, there might be 50 employees, there might be 75 devices, when in reality it's probably at least 100, and even sometimes some environments reaching up to 150. So if you're not continuously looking for devices, if you're not continuously looking for issues and vulnerabilities on those devices, right? I mean, their vulnerabilities are being published every day and just distributed. And if you're not continuously looking for them, again, it might be somebody that comes in one dime, and 3 weeks later they do something. But so you got to be continuously looking for that, and that's a continuously monitoring. And then this 4th element is really about is a function of security, email security. When again, it's back to the the user, the end user, the employee clicking on what looks like a fully legitimate email from the CEO asking to transfer some money. Right, we've all heard all the nightmare stories on those, but there are some really cool email security programs that make it easy to prevent, or at least minimize the risk. Right, some things are always going to get through. Employees are continuously do stupid things, but at least you can, again, minimizing that risk. And so again, all 4 of these I really look at being, if you heard of the term left of boom, right of boom, these are all left of boom, proactive, trying to prevent things from happening, whereas right of boom is sort of trying to fix things or remediate things after something has happened. So by deploying these 4 tactics and these 4 pillars, right, you really are enabling a better risk environment, or a lower risk environment for your customers.
Frank, I'm going to throw out a question to you that you might not know the answer to. So I put that out there.
Great.
Well, no, this isn't a tough spot one, but it's more, do you know if these email security programs are starting to extend to the SMS layer too? Because we're seeing more and more of the phishing attempts coming through the SMS channel because people are getting better at identifying phishing, emails and being able to look at those headers and figure out, should I open this, should I not? We've been hearing a big uptick of, trying to steal those credentials and other things through SMS. So I just don't know if you know whether or not those services are starting to incorporate that.
I haven't seen any specific examples, but again, to your point, I can't imagine them not developing that. So we have some contacts in those elements. I think that'd be some good follow-up to understand where they're at. I mean, I know I get, at least on a textual basis, an SMS or text, I get 3 or 4 a day of, hey, how are you? You haven't talked to me in a while. Yeah, well, that's because I don't know you, so get away.
And I will say, I think because it's our personal devices too, people are more apt to say nothing there, where, with email, they're a little more click happy, but it's definitely a growing area of concern. And, mobile device management's a whole other topic that could be tackled a different day. But these 4 core items, they speak to me and speak to almost any framework opportunity you look at as core elements of what those frameworks are looking for.
Yeah, I've noticed that some email protection or ATP providers are starting to do smishing or services like that. And you're right, Brian, it's people, when they're in front of their laptop or their desktop, they have more visibility. But when they're on the road on their mobile, that's when they actually click or instigate more action, because just the perception that you don't have the same visibility as you do on screen. So, and when you're on the road, you're more distracted. So yeah, there's that element of a heightened sense of risk when it comes to mobile devices, particularly personal ones. And yeah.
All right. Well, once again, we come back to that human factor, right? So Rick, let's segue into, why SMBs need to care and take action, right? What are the concerns that a small to mid-sized business should be thinking about, and our, MSPs on this call should be thinking about educating and providing some thought leadership to their clients about?
Thanks, Brian. Well, the leadership component it aligns with most businesses will grow organically. And when we look at organic growth, we look at different processes, and people and systems will all change. We see an increase in the application stack, people adding additional applications to solve small problems. We start to see the application stack grow, so therefore, the cyber footprint grows. Data is everywhere, or being stored in different repositories in different ways and shared externally in different ways. So in the short term, this organic growth works well for most businesses, but in the long term, when it comes to scalability, there has to be a bit more thought leadership and planning and strategic approach. So what really about the leadership component is with SMBs is about realigning business objectives and technology to those business objectives. And historically, we used to have heaps of applications. Well, we used to have applications that were, that are driving the business objectives. In other words, I've got an internal IT team or an external IT team. They have this set of tools that they know. So that's what we're going to sort of build our business around. Where now, with cloud and SaaS and all of these integration and application services that we can now go and invest in and get anybody to implement, we're now seeing that the technology is now having to, align to what the business's direction and vision is and their future objectives. So the reason why we look at the leadership service or the leadership approach is trying to bring together the stakeholders and having a discussion together around, what the people, process, and systems and are in the current state, and identifying through a gap analysis what that looks like in the future state, so that we can realign what we need to do from a technology, governance, a data point of view, an education point of view. And I think, traditionally we would be fixing, or MSPs might focus on fixing, connectivity or applications or providing that IT support factor. But in terms of that consulting piece, there's a little bit more maturity that's coming through, that I'm seeing coming through from the MSP market, where they're wanting to provide more thought leadership. So, strategic planning is becoming quite popular over here. We see, we see elements covering things like security measures or data protection, employee education and governance. There are regulations that are changing every day. There are commissions being run in Australia on different sectors that they need to, that are uncovering different weaknesses that we need to address. So, by engaging a VCIO service or a leadership service, to conduct this gap analysis, the stakeholders can, obtain that high-level overview of the current state and align their business to look at the future state and align the technology to achieve their future state goals. So from a leadership point of view, I see a lot more of that coming out of the MSP market.
And before you go into human firewall, I just want to add to that. You're hitting a sweet spot, of course, I'm in love with, right? We've centralized a lot of what we do at VCIO Toolbox around that joint strategic plan. But more important, it's also helping your customer. When you think about it from the lens of an MSP or a VCIO, it's helping educate the customer and helping them arrive at more confident, more informed decisions as well. When we can align the projects and services and the safeguards that we're looking to put in and show where that's going to tie to business outcomes that they're going to put together, it really helps that foster that customer's confidence in, yes, this is the right step that we need to do. And it helps move the needle quicker too, because now the customer feels more in control of that situation. So, my 2 cents with, around that leadership piece is MSPs look at thought leadership, look at advisory as the next evolution and next generation service providers kind of base tenant need to do, right? We have to be educating them because there's so many new technologies coming at us. Just look at what AI is doing out in the marketplace and how confused and how vast that world is. And these are opportunities for MSPs to really come in and use leadership as a way to help drive that business the right way with their clients. So I'll get off my soapbox and return it back to you, Rick. But
no, you're completely right. I mean, it's that traditionally we'd be reactive and putting spot fires out and trying to address things, and without looking at a high level overview, you don't see the codependencies that are in a business. And by doing this approach and that strategic planning approach, you're right. The customer feels like they've got more control, but there's also the ability of you've also set their expectation of what they're going to look at, forecasting, budgeting, investing, what they need to do with their teams and resources to try and achieve those project milestones. So giving that foresight for a client will give them a better understanding of, what an MSP is trying to do rather than trying to sell or provide another service or, fix another problem. It's about taking that conversation up to the sort of the management and stakeholder level. But in saying that, with the gap analysis and the workshops, you also want to bring in, the staff that are at the ground level at the front line, because that's where innovation bubbles up from. But yeah, like from a human firewall point of view, the biggest threats are internal end users, and from the previous graph that we saw, that is obviously it's pretty evident. And I think we've got a wide demographic in the workforce that were all born at different stages of when the technology advances and computer literacy has been around. So some of us might remember being born without a mobile phone in our hands, possibly for the first 20 years, and those were the glory days. Now we're so switched on, and everybody's having to update or keep up to date with the latest trends, the latest threats. We can't really rely. Well, it's not fair for people who are just trying to come in and do and make a living, who don't work in IT, who don't listen to the threats every day, and expect them to be able to be fully aware of exactly what's going on. So, there's a responsibility for us to be able to educate them and protect them through systems and process and education. And education forms a big part of that. So I think, from the human firewall point of view, we really need to do take that lens of people, process, and systems and data in place. And I segregate data because it needs to be on it. It's a separate entity. It's just that important, and that's what people are targeting. So I think with the right tools in place, the right monitoring tools in place, the right education platforms in place, then we can start to lift everybody up to a certain level, given regardless of what their experience or what their understanding of technology is. Are you guys seeing a similar thing in your side?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you talked about it, Rick. Technology changes. When you think back to the old days of, even the early days of the cell phone, that was still the only other channel people can get us on besides our landline. Now with all these different options and, between social media, different texting options, different Teams and in Slack options, it just opens up so many more exposure points, and that human firewall component is immense in the conversation now. How about you, Frank?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, not much more I can say. I think you like I said before in my piece there, just making the connections there and making, the awareness is paramount. So.
All
But
right.
if we're looking at the cyber insurance side, I'm not sure what you guys see in the US. I mean, we seem to think, Brian, we've talked in the past that sometimes the US might be a number of years ahead, and that time gap is getting closer and closer in terms of what we're seeing.
Definitely is.
And this comes down to sort of the litigation side of things, which is tightly wound into the cyber insurance front. But for most part in Australia, what we're seeing is a lot of the cyber insurance vendors have always run these questionnaires, and it's once a year, and it's required for the client to be able to fill it out and understand exactly what they're filling out as honestly as they can. But in recent years, those questionnaires have gone from, simple basic baseline cybersecurity hygiene that we've all known and loved for a while to, things that are aligned to the Essential 8 standards that are almost overwhelming some of the stakeholders in every business. And the challenges are that some businesses are experiencing insurance vendors that are saying, well, who do we speak to first when an event occurs? I'm not sure whether this is a hot topic in the US, but, there's this challenge that you should be speaking to a certain group of people in a certain sequence when it comes to cyber events.
That's definitely getting more refined. And it used to be what you call your IT guy first, right? But now it's really kind of either called your agent or your lawyers, right? I mean,
yeah,
they need to be brought in first, just before anything happens.
So and the legal team that you need to engage need to have some sort of specialization in cyber so they can address and appropriately advise a business when an event occurs. And then from that point is then, okay, do you engage your MSP, and then do you engage the insurance company? The insurance companies, some of them are already bundling in response teams that are part of their service. So there's the element of, okay, well, if I don't engage your response team first, then what does that impact my insurance claim?
There's actually, I'll just add, there's two pieces to that, right, that I think sort of are required in there. One is sort of incident response preparedness, right? Sort of understanding, you as an MSP need to be working with your customer and say, hey, here's let's work on this together. It could be a tabletop exercise, right? It could be just maybe they have a template that they just sort of work through with the end user, but the end user needs to know who to call first, when to call you, the MSP, and that really is probably a fifth pillar here we want to talk about it, right? Is preparedness, right? It's another form of proactivity, but it's it's not, again, go back to this, not when, but but when. You're gonna get hacked, and you need to be prepared for that. So,
and I'm going to come at this a little bit differently, right? You guys are coming at it from the incident happening and that kind of and the preparedness going in. But let's start with the simple part, which is be truthful in your application. One of the things that's starting to happen here in the States are claims are being denied because people were not forthright during this process. The second thing I would say is MSPs. Don't fill out the form, guide your customer on the form. The customer needs to be the one that's filling out the application and doing the technical specs, not you. They need to be held on it. We're seeing some challenges from a litigation standpoint on that, both getting claims paid and who's actually liable. So those are considerations as well when you're thinking about cyber insurance, because, obviously an insurance company, their number one want is to pay as little as humanly possible, if not nothing. And any steps that you can do that are perceived as potential fraud can have two different outcomes. One, the claim not getting paid, but we are starting to see the punitive damages here, whether they're financial, but oftentimes even criminal, starting to pop up if the fraud is big enough. So, all this wraps around that cyber insurance conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
it's back to the as you said, the truthfulness, and but kind of that really wraps onto it's not a checkbox anymore. It's not a one-time thing, right? It's a, I've heard the term sort of continuous insurability, right? Which is making sure that you're doing. I mean, in the example of, somebody, they deployed MFA, they checked the box, they said they had it, but when something happened and they went to investigate, they realized that the executive or a couple of people had turned it off. Well, that was grounds right there just for denying the claim.
Yep.
So, you can't just do it once and forget about it. You got to be vigilant with your customer and be honest with them. Right? I mean,
and that's the
Yeah,
thing.
so-
It's becoming more complicated because, again, it's essentially aligned is what I'm seeing over it. And not only that, it's gone from 50 questions to over a couple of hundred questions, of which clients have no idea what and how to answer them. So Brian's advice is about guiding them to answer those questions is paramount. You don't want to fill it out. But I mean, even things like you were saying, Frank, when they say MFA, is that a checkbox, or have you got MFA protecting your current environment? Then some people have this perception on this note that, okay, yeah, I have Microsoft MFA on my Microsoft tenant login, so I don't, say yes, check the box. But what if there is a third-party application or something in the application stack that is also just as sensitive, which happens to be the entry point of any issues that arise? So it's really about changing the lens as well with your clients around cyber and insurance and prevention. Is don't just look at it what you're managing, but looking at the entire application stack. Now, you may not manage their third-party applications, but as an advisor in a leadership piece, you really need to be saying, well, that's nice that we've done the MFA on your Microsoft tenant, but what about your ERP applications, your finance applications, your health records, where are your HRIS systems? So it really, when it comes to going through these questionnaires, the lens needs to be not just what the MSP manages, but it's the entire gamut of the application stack.
Yeah.
But I've also noticed that some people are becoming so overwhelmed with the questionnaire that they go, well, if I need to spend 50 grand's worth of premium for $1 million worth of coverage, is it worth it? And that's I don't know if you guys, if the US are experiencing that as well, but it's just interesting that people are still trying to question whether they need to have cyber insurance or not, and if so, then what's the likelihood of coverage and the claims being, processed to cover them in an event occurs?
Yeah, well, part of that is understanding, right, the value of the business, to whether it's the amount of downtime or it's the amount of data that you have and what can be, utilized outside of it, and how big is your business. So it's as you said, it's a complicated and multi-factored decision process. But we have seen, I think there's at least there's more awareness of it and sort of the discussion, which is great. I mean, at least that's being started and being, as you say, truthfully understood of, what is the risk, and it's a risk reward, right? Or it's a how much are you willing to lose, right, if you don't have this protection? So,
and the other question is, if an event happens, they talk about that some businesses may not recover. So,
right.
Yeah, it's weighing up what that value is.
Yeah, I think you got to look also at what the reputation risk is, because in some cases it doesn't matter what happens, you're not going to recover. It doesn't matter. So all you're talking about is financial restitution at that point. But we're getting into some of the deeper layers of those customer decisions that have to happen internally that we're not in control of, but certainly can guide to part of the reason they need us. Let's get into the direct hire and outsourcing component of it. This is another question that comes up often. So Rick, hit us with your thoughts on that.
Well, in terms of whether you have a CO or a virtual CO or outsource it, MSPs, I'm finding, are doing both. Traditionally, they're trying to find the right sort of, if it's an internal resource, they're traditionally trying to find the right sort of mix. Some people call it a unicorn, I think is the term that gets spun around. Basically, someone with enough technical a knowledge and then someone with enough client-facing knowledge or a client consulting sort of skill set, and having that combined those combined skills to be able to deliver some sort of VCIO service. So there are ones that are doing both. Some don't want to reinvent the wheel. You know, they want to take the experience from people who have already developed and lived and breathed VCIO for a number of years. It's in terms of Australia, it's been around, and that term was coined around the 2017 mark when I was working in another MSP, and they were talking about how do we bring that into the business. But some MSPs don't want to venture into consulting at all. They just want to focus on what they've worked on historically, but also not miss out by putting an added value VCIO service. So some of them that I'm working with, some MSPs I'm working with are, wanting to have a one-step removed, unbiased partnership. So they bring me in with a client to be able to go through a discovery and a gap analysis, establish the reports, establish the roadmaps. So it's basically analyze, design, and deliver. And then that's an iterative process. So we look at building something out for anywhere from 1 to 2 years. Some clients want 5. And then we revisit that process on an 18-month cycle, I find is the sweet spot. So some MSPs will bring me in partnership to do that. And they basically say, well, we don't have anything to hide. We want to be completely transparent with clients. We're not here to try and sell you anything. It's a matter of trying to help you, meet your objectives and the long-term goals, and how can we help you on that journey. So I think there's a mix of both, but I think VCIO as an outsource provides MSPs the opportunity to dip their toe in the water and see what it's like. Then they can decide whether they want to build that capability internally or not. What are you seeing, Brian, from a VCIO toolbox point of view? Are you getting similar sort of?
So, the way I look at it is it depends on the business that they're serving, right? So I'm seeing more and more MSPs starting to look at advisory services as a whole. And this is a hybrid between fractional VCIO and fractional VCISO as well, as becoming a part of their portfolio. From a customer's perspective, it really comes down to how complex are their technology requirements and what do they need. If you're a active, very active, a SaaS company building technology, things like that, you might need your own CIO at that point because there's a lot of considerations in organization. But there's a lot of traditional businesses that are never going to hire that person, never hire an IT director. And a lot of MSPs were coming at it purely from the QBR perspective. Let's go out there, let's give them a roadmap, let's give them some of those things. And that's critical and crucial, don't get me wrong. But there's a huge opportunity for guidance. Many of you may know Jay McBain. He's a leading analyst with Canalys, and he had put out a report that basically showed that right now the channel is about a 3.5 billion market. It's going to grow to about 7 billion, but the MSP's share stays flat during that period. And that's because of the emergence of marketplaces and other things. So what's really being told to you is your game's changing. Break fix is almost gone. Cloud migrations, the majority of that heavy cloud lift happened during COVID. So what's next for the MSP? The next generation MSP has to emerge and build other recurring service offerings. And we're seeing that a lot of the larger scale MSPs, that's what they're turning to now. Fractional VCIO, it's also allowing them to go up mid-tier market now and fill some gaps there. And then the VCISO side of it. So, the direct hire and outsource question really belongs to the customer that you're working with, but we're seeing customers that want to outsource portions of it. It may be leadership just in an area that their CIO is not strong at, and they'll partner up there. And now you're filling that gap, but also bringing enhancements to budget management and other things that the CIO might be able to benefit from. There's a strong area of co-managed clients that really are looking for this type of service. Frank, how about you?
And I was saying that a lot of that, beyond the resource ability, right? I guess part of it's kind of related to that is just the cost, right? I mean, a CISO, to bring on a CISO full time is not a low cost endeavor for an MSP or for their end user. So the fractional value of that, and that's part of what our company, parent company, does with IGI is some of that, and it's a huge value, right? beyond the value of the analysis, but it's a third-party viewpoint, right? It's sort of looking, not too incestuous, right, on what you're looking at and what you're trying to fix, right? It's getting a third-party unbiased opinion on where you're at and where you need to go.
Yeah.
Third-party viewpoint, and also leaning in on the knowledge that service providers have. We have resources that a lot of corporate environments don't have. They could be very myopic and only see what they know. And we can bring a breadth of information from various industries or within their industries on how things are being done elsewhere to really give them some of that comparative as well. But that should not be given away for free, right? The old line, nobody buys the milk if they can get the cow for free. So you got to look at how you want to package that long term. So I know we're getting we're not getting late on time overall, but I want to make sure we keep some of our presentation moving. So Frank, I want to segue here into a case for continuous security, and really, what's that mean?
Yeah. Well, we kind of hinted at it with the four sort of the four pillars, right? This is kind of maybe a different four pillars that support those initial four, right? It's kind of a different way to look at it. But I mean, these are the threats that I think a lot of those pillars are addressing, right? The threat of shadow IT, knowing that printer that gets added into the network that could have some serious open ports and issues, right? Or somebody bringing on their own router or wireless router into their office because they want to connect more devices, right? So that's a huge threat and needs to be monitored and sort of looking for continuously. Sort of related to that is the specific asset detection, right? Somebody brings in a printer or brings in, their own home PC, right, and plugs it into the corporate network. Well, that PC, right, it doesn't have any protections, doesn't have any, any other stuff, but it's getting access into everything. So understanding that and sort of being able to provide and look for that. The next stage is sort of understanding what you need to do to fix it. Could be the vulnerability that we find via nodeware that, we give you the recipe, you need to go and figure that out and be addressing that when it's found, right? I mean, we do a daily check against every asset on the network for new vulnerabilities that are being produced and being, published. So if you're, a day late, a couple of days late, the hackers, the bad guys know when those are coming out and they start looking for those things in your environment. So if you're not, finding them, if you're not remediating them quickly and sort of actively and continuously, then you're leaving open a lot of governance. And all this then plays into the asset governance, which is, bigger expertise of yours, Brian and Rick. But, knowing what you've got, how you're protecting it, and how you're actively protecting it is a critical piece there. So I think those are four ways to look at what is needed. And if you go to the next slide, let me just continue a little bit on this understanding and kind of more of a definitional piece, which is, you've heard probably each of these three terms on their own, and sometimes they sound like the same, or sometimes the customer or even you, the MSP, is using them interchangeably. And I just wanted to kind of do a quick, clarification or definition of each of them. So, vulnerability assessment, really think of it as a one-time activity, right? Maybe you're running a probe on your network. You could be using nodeware to just do it a one-time deal. You're identifying, you're looking at what devices have, high risk and high vulnerability, and you could be addressing those at that time, but it doesn't, a week later, you could be totally out of date. The next play is really the vulnerability management, right? And kind of back to this continuous monitoring point, right? And continuous looking at systems and addressing them, based on priority, right? You can't do them all in one day. You can't do them in 1 week or 1 month, but you need to look at them continuously, keep finding new ones, because again, they're going to keep coming, right? Whether you look at it once, you look at it every year, every month, they're going to be coming there. So vulnerability management, again, is looking at, from an internal standpoint, using your own tools and providing that as an MSP. Now, the distinction here with the penetration test, right, that's really an independent third party that needs to drive this and be looking at sort of ways to get in, right, and providing, we call them ethical hackers or white hats or whatever it might be, right? They're people that know how to get in. A lot of them are ex-military. They're intelligence access and tools that way, but they are looking for ways to get in and how to exploit them, right? And provide that reporting, provide that back to the MSP and their customer, right? This is, again, because it's a third party, right? This is a true thing. And this is this isn't required across the board, but some industries and some verticals and some government agencies, right, are requiring this on a regular basis, minimally yearly. But really, if you can do this quarterly or, you know, at least twice a year, you're going in. So think of it, the first two are kind of the inside look at what's there and how to fix it and sort of looking at it on an ongoing basis. And the penetration test is the external third party look at what's, you know, what needs to be done. So hopefully that helps some understanding of what these differences are, and happy to answer any questions and go deeper if somebody wants to follow up.
This is one of the biggest things that comes up, because a lot of people look at the vulnerability management piece that you defined here, Frank, and they think it's penetration testing, you know, or they're leveraging it as a penetration test. And, you know, that can be, for some industries, very scary, right? The other thing that I love, so in full disclosure, we're Nodeware users here at VCIO Toolbox, and vulnerability management is an interesting concept, because my PC is part of our tests that we use when we're doing demos. And I will see my PC that scored a 900 yesterday look like a 200 the next day. And now I got to go fix things. You know, it's amazing how, you know, back to what you said, Frank, it can happen overnight, depending on what the asset is, how those CVEs come out. And usually they're pretty easy to fix. But, you know, that's something that before Nodeware, I wouldn't have known. Weeks would have gone by before I would have known.
Yep.
So, you know, I want to, oh, go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Frank, how often, I mean, the vulnerability scanning, you know, there were MSPs that might charge a certain rate for 2 weeks worth of scanning, and they might do it maybe every 6 months to a year. Is the pattern in the US to look at, I mean, we're talking about continuous vulnerability management, so I think it's actually important to be able to keep your finger on the pulse.
Right.
But are you saying that it's every quarter or every 6 months?
I would say vulnerability assessments, right, are often more used in a prospecting tool.
Yeah.
Perspective, right? You're coming into a new customer, you want to get a feel for them. You need to build your proposal, your SOW, based on what you're seeing and how risk, you know, where they're at, right? So that can often be used as an in and out, right? So that's really an assessment deal. But what we're seeing, again, whether it's compliance requirements or insurance requirements, right? The MSPs are starting to get that request from their customers, right? They're not always trying to out there and push it and promote it, but their customers are, you know, asking them for it. And, you know, we didn't even talk about the supply chain issues, right? The customer of your customer, right? And what access they might have, what demands they're pushing on you, right? So all these things can play into that, but that's for another session. But the continuous play is really, you know, a lot of the frameworks, you know, the new NIST requirement that just came out a few weeks ago, the CSF is calling more for continuous, right? So we're matching up against that, and it's only going to go. A vulnerability assessment might be, again, it's just a one-time thing and gives you some insights, but it doesn't protect you as much as management would.
Yeah. Well, the threats are 24 hours, so it's not like it's going to stop anytime soon.
Exactly.
All right. So, you know, kind of moving on from here and wrapping up a little bit, you know, really, I think what you're hearing here from all of us is to really get to the right security steps. You've got to have the right tools in place. You've got to have the right methodology, but you also got to look at building a cybersecurity program with your customers, or at least guiding them to building that cybersecurity program. And for those of you that might not be familiar with what's in a cybersecurity program, you know, I'm going to make it very basic. I know it goes much deeper than this, but it's really making sure that you've got the right policies and procedures in place, and you can measure to those policies and procedures. You've got the right tools in place to support the controls that you're going to measure to. And then ultimately, you're taking action and you're reviewing these things on a regular basis, right? So those are some of the simple things. And you kind of see that laid out here in the 4 things. It's, you know, understand your program requirements, what you're going to need in terms of collateral from a policy and procedure standpoint. Pick a framework. I'm not going to say any framework, but pick a framework that's either industry-based for you or something that has teeth from a cybersecurity standpoint. I know a lot of the customers here in the US, I mean, Essential 8 obviously is doing that in Australia. I'm seeing some of my Australian customers do Essential 8 with a combination of maybe CIS, implementation group number 1. There were definitely some nice updates in Essential 8 in November that brought a little bit more policy and procedure into it, and not as much Windows focus, but there's still gaps. And that's, what I'm seeing kind of as a collective every once in a while. Certainly the NIST 2.0 is Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 is becoming a really nice tool for customers that want to build a cyber program, because it's addressing everything from the governance layer, basically holding people responsible, which was missing there. And it goes through incident response and recovery, which is a bit of a gap on the current version of CIS as well. So you'll pick your framework. You'll then assess your risk from those frameworks and external factors like seismic activity and things like that to really build a risk profile that looks at impact and likelihood of these things happen. Frank and I are West Coast, East Coast. I don't worry too much about earthquakes over here. I don't think he's thinking much about hurricanes, right? So here in the States. So, for us, we'd have different risk profiles for our organizations just based on some geography, but that often gets overlooked when you just use a pure framework approach, and needs to be a consideration within a risk profile. And obviously, and ultimately, you got to gain evidence and proof. Even if you're not being formally audited, you want to have proof points. So if you do have that claim from a cyber insurance standpoint, you can show you were doing your due diligence along the way. You were doing iterative framework updates. You were exercising on your POEM, and you have the results from tools like a Nodeware or, some of the security awareness tools showing that training occurred, identity tools showing the people that logged in and those capabilities are being managed too, and be able to prove that out should you do that. So, building a cybersecurity program is a huge opportunity, I think. Again, one man's opinion, for the MSP in terms of building a fractional VCISO service, and your stack is going to help support that. And when you really start thinking about how you're going to work with these teams, Rick, you touched upon a lot of this, but when you're building that cybersecurity program, you can't do it in a vacuum just with that point of contact that you're doing work with. It has to be a team-based approach. In the world of VCIO Toolbox, we have this concept called the Office of VCIO. When we're providing VCIO services to a customer, yes, there'll be a point person. The VCIO is the quarterback, but they're managing a team-based approach to making sure that your needs are being solved by the right resources, right? So we bring our engineers in, our security architects, our executive teams into it. We need to have the same approach model when we're working with a team and building a cybersecurity program externally. We need to know what's in the CEO's mind. They're thinking about business direction. They need to understand what risk means to them as they're trying to achieve a better business outcome, and leaning on technology to do it. CFOs need to understand the budget and understand the risk behind it. They can't take on every project in a day. So how can we help guide them as a resource to prioritizing risk and then looking at those projects and helping match that to the budget? When we look at working with IT teams, again, some cases we may be the IT team, but in many cases we're also working with with some external resources there. Are we looking at the vendor relationships? Frank, you touched upon it. What's that downstream look like? Are we doing vendor risk assessments? Do we understand how those that actually have access to our data are conducting business internally? Are they doing backups? Background checks. Let's start as simple as that. We don't know that oftentimes. Same with line of business managers. Here we can understand what isn't working for them technologically and see if security is going to even make it more prohibitive for them to get the workflows that they're looking for, or are there steps we can take to improve workflow and consider security in that process? And then finally, we got to understand, how the end user community is operating, security awareness and training being a critical part of that. But how do we engage with those folks? So, obviously these are all key stakeholders in a business, but you can all look into yourselves and say, are we reaching that deep with our customers? And the win back for the MSP usually is if you're reaching this deep with your customers, you're now building relationships that are going to keep you from ever being displaced long term, right? So, there's a win-win scenario that happens here. And, we'll have different workshops on building a cybersecurity program in the coming months as well, where we really talk about, what is the role of the VCISO? What do they owe? What are their responsibilities? What do they owe as deliverables? And what are the timelines for approaching that? But simply put, as I mentioned earlier, it's make sure you got policies and procedures in place, Make sure they're reviewed regularly. Make sure you got the right tools from your security stack, getting the data you need to answer those 4 critical essential safeguards quickly. And then pick your framework that you can use to structure all this and report on it.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So with that said, folks, we're getting near the end of our time together. You know, I want to open up the floor for any Q&A that anybody has. You know, feel free to drop anything into the Q&A box if you have questions there. If you want to come on live with us, I'll try to make that happen. But you know, just raise your hand or you know, put in the chat that you want to ask a question directly, and I'll be happy to bring you on live as well. While we're waiting for questions, you know, from the attendees today, guys, any closing thoughts you might have? We'll start with you, Rick.
Well, I think you've really nailed it on the head when it comes to things like delivering value to the end client, and how do you deliver that is not about trying to be everything to an MSP being everything to all their clients' needs tech related. So, you know, there is the opportunity for partnerships and tools to work together to try and bridge any gaps. And that's where things like VCIO and VCISO and, you know, platforms like VCIO Toolbox and Node, where all sort of complement an MSP's offering. Because if you pointed it out that if you don't have that depth with your clients, then somebody else will. So it's a matter of making sure that you have that trusted relationship with your client, and that when it comes to technology, they're not just going to come to you with what you manage, but okay, I need someone to be able to guide me on where to go. So, and going through the stack in terms of not just from a tech point of view, but the governance and compliance and frameworks and risk point of view, I think it wraps it all together in a nice package for, you know, people to be able to understand where are we going and how are we going to get there, and who are we going to get, or who's taking us with on that journey.
Yep. So, you know, I think what we can do is we'll put up our contact slide here as we do closing thoughts. I do have a question from Jeremy, and it's probably directed to you, Frank. Jeremy's asking, is the best place to start with Nowhere setting up a demo on the website? I think probably the best step, Jeremy, is
either you can go there, or if you're an SMB IT Pro member, we have a special registration page on the member site and some promotional pricing there. So if you want to come through that way, but here's my email as well. Just send me a note and I'll send you a calendar link, and love to.
Yeah, I was going to say, Frank,
15-20 minutes, and we'll be able to, and then we can do a proof of concept if you want to run it on your own. So happy to.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I was going to say, any closing thoughts for you, Frank?
Yeah, I would just, you know, again, I think it just comes back to proactivity, right? Thinking of your customers best, you know, with them at your heart, right? I mean, you're going to get stickiness, you're going to get value shown and delivered back to your business if you're doing the right things, you know, ahead of time, right? You know, again, there's so many tools out there. I know that's an overloaded thing, but this, go back to the basic pillars, right? I just kind of reiterate that and understand what sometimes it's just understanding what your customer is already expecting, right? Are you doing what they're expecting? Have you matched up, you know, what you're delivering to what their expectations are? And if you're not, then you need to level set on that. And that, I think some of these tools will help do that. So love to follow up with any other questions afterwards. Again, please send me an email. And this has been a great session, though. Appreciate the time, everybody.
Yep. And I will wrap up with, you know, something that I wanted to bring up a little bit earlier, but I'll wrap up with, you know where your gaps are in what you're doing with your customer already. You know, Rick talked about gap assessment to identify where the gaps might be in, you know, systems, process, training, and security for a client, but know where your gaps of knowledge are within the client as well. Frank, as you were touching upon shadow IT and really looking at it from an asset standpoint, what really popped into my mind too is application, shadow IT from an application perspective. Go talk to your marketing teams that you work with out at your clients. I will bet you've got customer data and systems you didn't even know existed and weren't vetted. They're one of the chief offenders, and it's frightening because they're just taking databases of information and trying every shiny new marketing tool that comes out with your data. So doing an inventory of where the gaps are, where what you might not know inside of your client is. And that's a great place to get started as well. Then see how that translates to your tool stack and education you can bring to your client. But there are so many places now that are penetration points. So with that being said, that's my closing thought. I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. I see a lot of folks from the US as well as from overseas. So I know some of you are taking time out of your personal day here to join us. So we really appreciate that. Hopefully we met your needs in the content that we brought to you today. Please reach out to any of us with any questions that you might have, and we'll be happy to answer them. And, I know that we will, we'll probably get together quarterly with this group and continue to build some new topics as well for you. Anything else, gentlemen, before we wrap things up and give everybody their night back?
Let's let them get on with their day and go put all to practice what we just been discussing. So
yeah. So a question came up: will the slides be provided for review? We will be sending out a copy of this recording, and we can include the slides with that for those that attended today. So happy to do that.
All right.
That's been great, Brian. Thanks for inviting me, and Frank, and all your support. So it's been good.
All right, guys. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of their day or night, wherever you may be, and we'll see you again soon.